And we are now live, Ashley.
Thank you so much, Mary, and thank you, Kelly. Welcome, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to our virtual presentation with Kelly Dwyer from Nature Education Opportunities. My name is Ashley Davis, and I'm a staff at AARP New Hampshire. Myself and one of our lead volunteers, Mary Robert, will be hosting the event tonight. Our presenter this evening is Kelly Dwyer. I'd like to let everyone know that this event is being recorded. The recording will be posted a few days at our YouTube channel if you search for AARP New Hampshire or use the link that I put in chat. I'll put them up again, don't worry. Mary will be monitoring the chat box and raising your questions and comments throughout the program. We're all here to help. Before we get started, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. Make sure to mute your line. Right now we're in webinar mode, so you shouldn't be able to speak, but you should have access to the chat. If you would like to ask a question or make a comment, please use that chat box. There's a chat button at the bottom of your screen and it'll pop up for you. At AARP New Hampshire, we are focused on the well-being of the 50 plus in the Granite State. Our work frequently focuses on livable communities. By 2030, 1 in 5 Americans will be older than 65. AARP supports the efforts of neighborhoods, towns, cities, and rural areas to be great places for people of all ages, a goal that Nature Education Opportunities shares. AARP believes that communities should be safe, walkable streets, age-friendly housing and transportation options, access to needed services, and opportunities for residents of all ages to participate in community life. For more information about livable communities, please visit our resource site. I will put a link in the chat. We have been working closely with Nature Education Opportunities, and we hope that our collaboration continues to open doors, quite literally, for everyone 50 plus. Our host today is Kelly Dwyer. Kelly is the founder of Nature Education Opportunities, is an award-winning environmental educator and certified New Hampshire elementary teacher. She has been creating and delivering engaging programming for audiences of all ages for over 15 years. As a certified wellness coach, Kelly also brings a deep understanding of the numerous benefits of connecting with the natural world to reduce stress, improve health, and embrace a more mindful approach to life and learning. Kelly, thank you for joining us tonight and introducing us to our backyard wildlife neighbors.
Thank you so much, Ashley and Mary, for getting us started, and welcome everyone. We have quite a great representation of states around the country. So I just want to sort of zoom out a little bit and talk about wildlife in our backyards. Your habitats may be very different, for example, in Florida, in California, and Oregon even, than we have here in my home state of New Hampshire. However, the themes that I'll cover tonight are the same no matter where we live. It's about understanding these neighbors that share our habitats, really finding out about the animals that are in your surrounding community so that we can live and exist peacefully and for a healthy point of view for them and for us. So wildlife in our backyards, because we do, if you get outside, and this is really a great way to just step outside your door any time of the year, any season, and just take a deep breath, and you will see and hear wildlife. It most likely will be birds for many of us that are living in the cold north right now, and a lot of these animals aren't quite as active yet. But it's really a great way to connect with our natural environment, and that's part of my mission and my passion with my business, is to make sure that we all have that opportunity to connect for our health and wellness by just being outside in our own backyards, in our own communities. So meet your neighbors. I found this a fun presentation I put together a few weeks ago because it really is important to understand who we are sharing our spaces with. And this little character looking in my slider here, and we'll talk about this animal, possum. Many of you have possums around you. They're very comfortable in urban and suburban areas. This little character we call Hank. And I was telling Ashley and Mary before we get started, as a naturalist, I typically don't name animals, but there was something so endearing about this little guy that I couldn't resist. My husband and my daughters and I were eating dinner on our glass porch that we have here, and he just sort of waddled up the steps and he looked in with this really forlorn look like, wow, that looks like they're really having a better meal than I'm finding out rummaging in the woods. So I was so lucky to be able to grab this of him. But Hank is a frequent visitor in my yard, and he's really quite a character. Great. Oh, this is the time, Mary, that for some reason I'm not able to advance my slide. I apologize, folks. I'm going to stop sharing and see if I can. Oh, no, for some reason. Okay. Oh, here we go. Oops.
Hey, Kelly, do you need any help?
Yeah, I think for some reason it wouldn't have let me advance my slides. So can you still hear me now?
We can hear and see you, but not your presentation.
Okay, how about now? Can you see the
I-
slides?
No, I think you would need to share your screen again.
All right, let's see. Mhm. So if I can get back in. Okay, how about now? Mute myself.
No, we can see you.
Okay. I apologize for this, folks. I don't know what is going on. Let's, I'm seeing that the host has disabled participant screen sharing.
Oh, hold on a second. I think, yeah, you had moved. Let me. Okay. Okay, you should be all set now.
All right, let's see if we can get back to slideshow from the beginning. Okay, here we go. I again apologize. We had this glitch last time. I'm not sure if it's a webinar feature. But anyway, so to get back on track, so we are going to focus on a couple of key areas tonight. One of them will be the habitats that we all share in common with these animals. And then we'll do some little profiles, species profiles of common ones that we see here in the Northeast and probably all along throughout the Mid-Atlantic as well. And I suspect into some areas like Minnesota and even over into the West Coast. Some of them are some of the species that we will see throughout the northern part of our country. And then finally, we'll talk about the strategies, ways that we can have a healthy coexistence with these animals, not only for ourselves, for our pets, but for them. Okay, so if we kind of zoom out and we think about the habitats that surround many of us, and again, like I mentioned before, for those of you that are living in Florida or California, if you think about the habitats that surround your community, where your home or your workspace even, there are most likely habitats that these animals are interested in as well. For example, here in New Hampshire, I have a lot of woods out behind me, and these pictures were all taken from my home area. So I have woods, I have fields, I have wetlands, and there are lots of parks around me as well. So these animals are used to navigating for their food, water, and shelter needs around these particular types of ecosystems. They've adapted over thousands of years to use these types of features to survive. And what's happened in many areas of our country is our development and our growth, and we are inadvertently encroaching upon their habitats. So, for example, like the wooded areas you see here in my slides, there's been a lot of growth around my home in Hooksett, New Hampshire, and big neighborhoods going in, which is causing this fragmentation of the forest. And it's making it difficult for these animals to move about searching for that food, water, and shelter to survive. The other thing that's a factor with their survival would be a thing called carrying capacity. As we encroach within their particular habitats, we're taking the resources and it becomes difficult for animals to sort of survive in the sense of when young are forced out and to find their new territories, there may not be available space for them. So you may find in your area there's been a lot more roadkill. There's a lot more sometimes scuffles with your pets. So we're dealing particularly with coyotes, and I'll get to that toward the end of the presentation, with a lot of conflict. So we'll talk about ways that we can mitigate that. And many of the animals that I'll feature tonight are extremely adaptable. They're used to living around people. They're readily using urban as well as suburban areas to live. So again, it'd be kind of fun to see what their particular features are. Another thing to consider is what types of things are we offering in our yard that we may not think about that are attractive to these particular types of animals. And many of them have a really acute sense of smell. That's how they're locating food and water. So if you think about what's in your surrounding, for example, if you have a grill that you've just left open to cool and the residual smell of maybe the cooking food on there could attract raccoons, skunks, and even here in the Northeast in the next couple of weeks, black bear will be coming out of hibernation, and with an acute sense of smell, they'll be seeking out those early spring food sources. Securing your trash, your recycling, even your compost is another thing you can do to mitigate any type of conflict or having these animals come in and causing some disruptions. Here again in the Northeast and probably many areas in the country where we have black bear that hibernate, the warming winters that we're experiencing have caused many of these animals to come out of hibernation earlier than they historically have. So New Hampshire Fish and Game usually recommends by April 1st to remove bird feeders. I have found with my wildlife camera that we get bears usually by mid-March here in a northern state. So just keep an eye out for that. If you do have bird feeders out and you tend to have bear in your area, that it may be sooner than historically you've experienced it. In terms of shelter, all of these animals are looking for shelter. Most of them that I'll talk about are primarily nocturnal, but you will see them during the day for certain reasons we'll discuss. But they also need sheltering areas to have dens so that they can have young. And our sheds, our porches that are not really tightly secured, a little crawl space under that shed, for example, or you can see the lattice work in that little skirting of that porch has a little bit of a buckle, and those are really attractive spaces for some of these smaller mammals. So just take a look around your yard, around your property, and look with an eye as if you were an animal looking for food, water, shelter. And sometimes we can mitigate a potential conflict by taking care of something pretty quickly. Okay, so let's start with our wonderful mammals with the raccoon. This is a classic animal that many people recognize right away with that beautiful little robber mask you can see around the eye, and then the bushy ring tail, two of the hallmark characteristics of this particular mammal. So let's kind of get into some of the really interesting sort of natural history characteristics of the raccoon. I find by understanding animals and why they're doing a certain thing or why they're behaving a certain way, what their needs are, makes it easier for us to coexist with them, sort of like anything. If you get to know somebody and understand them, it's easier to sort of get along and coexist. So raccoons are extremely curious. They have very nimble fingers. You can see that paw on the left side of the screen. They have 5 fingers on each of their front paws. extremely sensitive touchpads. So they have a wonderful sense of touch, very nimble fingers. I'm often jealous on cold days when my fingers aren't working well of the nimble fingers that raccoons have. So they're able to sort of undo that bungee cord around your trash container. They can pick through, simple things to open and spring open any type of birdseed containers if you're storing it outside, for example. So with those nimble fingers, they are quite adept at getting into and getting what they're looking for. So just keep that in mind. They're very clever. They have extremely good sense of hearing and the eyesight. You can see here with his brown eyes that they have a big pupil. Most animals that are active at night, the nocturnal animals, have excellent sense of vision. They have a lot of rods in their eyes and they can see quite well at night with very dim lighting or almost no lighting whatsoever. Now, raccoons are very agile climbers. So one thing to consider if you do have raccoons around your property, that they can climb trees, they can climb into houses by, if you have, for example, a limb of a tree that seems to be resting or close to your roof, you may want to look at that because raccoons can nimble their way up there and then they'll be seeking sheltered areas. So oftentimes people around here are calling wildlife removal for raccoons that are denning up in their attics or even their chimneys. So they recommend that you cap your chimney if you have an open access chimney, or that look for those spaces that raccoons could get in from your roof access, as well as underneath any porches. So just to kind of, again, take a little perusal of your property. Very opportunistic animal, as you kind of probably have gathered. They're opportunistic in terms of where they shelter and den, as well as what they find to eat. Raccoons now, they will den up in the deep cold, but they're not a hibernator. They kind of go into a little bit of a deeper sleep or a state of torpor, where they'll lower their respiration and they'll kind of sort of shut things down for a little bit, but not like a true hibernator like some of the our other mammals, like a woodchuck. Right now, this time of year, in March, close to March, raccoons are starting to really navigate about looking for mates. And mating does take place in the month of March and early April. Young are born into May, typically 4 cubs the female will have. And we see a lot of raccoon activity during the day when we get into the springtime because that mother's out looking for food to feed her young. So it wouldn't be unusual to see a raccoon in springtime in the day. So that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a diseased individual or something to be alarmed about. Of course, we always need to be cautious. And I never suggest anybody approach wildlife. If you do find an animal that looks like it's injured, I strongly suggest you call a certified wildlife rehabilitator or even your local animal control so that they're trained to handle it and they have the correct equipment. But raccoons, again, there is a possibility they are one of the mammals that can contract and carry rabies. So just to kind of be careful, but don't be surprised if you see them out during the day in the spring. Most likely that animal is feeding young. They do carry canine distemper, but it's not transmitted to humans. And most of our pet dogs have been vaccinated against this, so it should be a smaller risk. So out of all the mammals that I'll talk about tonight, raccoons are probably the one that potentially can carry disease. But so by securing the areas that we talked about around our home, securing pet food, I know a lot of people tend to leave pet food outside for their dogs or their cats. Again, think about those animals that are looking for food with those heightened sense of smells. They're very attracted to that. So make sure that you bring your pet food in at night just to kind of keep everybody safe.
Kelly, there
Yes.
was a comment in the chat that one of our attendees had a raccoon that comes in through their cat door and eats from the cat dish while the cat sits on the chair and watches the raccoon eat.
Wow. Well, in that case, I probably would suggest that indoor cats are probably the safest for the cat as well as for any other animals like birds. So if that cat sounds like it's probably well established and that's its routine, I don't know if there's a way to let the cat out on a leash and sort of maybe seal up that cat door, because that's an access point that that raccoon will continue to use. And that potentially could pose a risk to the family as well as the cat. So that's something I definitely would talk to maybe a wildlife expert about, or even some of the pest removal to see what they would suggest about that. Maybe there's a humane way to trap that animal, but yeah, that's something I think that you definitely would want to take care of sooner than later. But it must be a hysterical visual to see the cat sitting on the chair, like, wait a minute, that's my dinner. What are you doing? Any other questions so far or comments, Mary, that you can see about raccoons before we move on to our wonderful skunk pals?
Someone had found two baby raccoons around a trash, I think. I can't remember, but they turned the babies on their side so that hoping that the mother would come for them.
Yeah, most often there's a pretty strong bond between a mother mammal, much like us with our children. So as long as the parent won't put themselves in jeopardy, they'll come back for those young. Okay, so let's kind of talk about the striped skunk. This is a gorgeous animal, in my opinion, and it's one of the most fastidiously clean animals. It sometimes has a bad reputation based on its smell. And we'll talk in this next slide about how it actually generates that particular noxious odor. But just to kind of back up a few fun things about our skunks, they are true omnivores and extremely opportunistic. They eat seasonal, which I kind of love that, as we're all supposed to eat seasonal. They, here in the Northeast, in the spring, the summer, and early fall, they are happy to dine on insects and berries and roots, kind of like a seasonal diet, like probably, that would benefit them from sort of a metabolic standpoint. The winter, they are active. They will den up just like the raccoons do to avoid the real deep, bitter cold. But they seek out small mammals, probably mice and voles, for their food. But most times during the winter, at least here in New Hampshire, skunks are denning up and in that state of torpor for the real bitter cold, snowy parts of the season. They are definitely nocturnal and extremely poor vision, which I'll explain in a minute why they have ways to cope with that, which makes it not such a big deal that they have not so great vision. They do have excellent sense of smell and excellent hearing, so they're able to sort of root out food sources. And one thing that is really important to understand about skunks is that they are a wonderful consumer of wasps and ground nesting bees. I found a couple of years ago, we had a beautiful area of sort of low perennials that I was sitting out just with a cup of coffee watching around my yard. And I could see a lot of yellow jackets just kind of buzzing around this one particular patch. So I watched for a little bit and then I noticed that it was enough of a pattern. I suspected there was a ground nest of yellow jackets, which I was so grateful that I was paying attention, because that's an area that I tend to walk on quite a bit. So one thing that I've staked it off so nobody would inadvertently step on it. In early fall, once we started to get the cold temperatures, I looked out one day and I saw that it was all sort of dug up. There was clumps of the little chambers that the wasps had, the yellow jackets rather, had actually made to put the larvae in. And the skunk, they're classic. This is what they'll do with that sense of smell. They'll root out any of those ground nesting wasp or bee nests, wait for a cooler night, pull them out. They'll eat the larvae or even some of the adults that are sort of in that slow sort of torpor state. They also will dig up grubs in the lawn. So again, that heightened sense of smell, they'll find those food sources, and they love those larvae of beetles and ground nesting wasps. So skunks also are right now, this time of year, within the next couple of weeks, the roadkill numbers will increase, unfortunately, because what happens is the males are leaving those denning sites and they're starting to look for a mate. So they're not again, with that poor vision, not very adept at crossing roadways. So the draw of attracting a mate is something that will keep them wandering far and wide. And unfortunately, there's a lot of collisions that happen within the next month. The female has usually about 4 to 5 kits, and they're weaned after about 2 months, and they'll leave the den and they'll stay with her for quite a few more months throughout the summer and into the fall. Now, in terms of predators, there's the great horned owl, which is one of the largest owl we have here in New Hampshire, is a big consumer of skunks. So if you think about a skunk meandering around at night, the great horned owl comes with that surprise silent wing element, talons out, and can grab a skunk, a small size skunk, and take off with it. Now let's kind of talk about that sense of smell, that or the defense mechanism that skunks are notorious for. And spraying that really sulfur noxious compound is something they do as a last resort, because it takes close to 2 weeks for the skunks to actually produce that that musky, just horrid sulfur smelling liquid. They store it underneath their tail in 2 little musk glands near the anal area. So the production of that, they won't just spray it at will, because they rely on that heavily for their survival. So what they'll do before they're actually spraying, they'll have a couple of really kind of interesting warning behaviors that it's important to pay attention to. If for some reason you're out and you come across a skunk, you're out, putting your garbage out or moving from your car to your home, and there's a skunk at night, they'll usually wave their tail and they'll hiss, they'll snarl, they'll stamp their feet, and they will prefer to try to waddle away quickly, of course, to retreat rather than get into an altercation with a human or even another animal. But if they do feel that threatened and the tail goes up and they are really forced to spray, they have extremely accurate stream. So if there's an approaching threat, they will be able to spray that stream close to the eyes of the perceived intruder, be it our dogs or probably not us, because I think most of us would have the common sense to retreat. But in an animal that's coming up close to them, they can spray pretty closely with accuracy a stream. If that threat is even closer to them, they're able to shift the spray to become more of a mist. So they're kind of like broadcast that irritant all over the particular animal that's threatening them. And then they will, again, try to retreat as soon as they can. If for some reason that you find your dog, for example, is sprayed, because dogs seem to be more curious, and I have a lot of friends that have dogs that this is a classic situation, especially this time of year where skunks are now starting to come out from those denning sites. The best thing to do is to try to neutralize the odor with baking soda, hydrogen peroxide, and a dish detergent mixture that kind of put your animal, if you're brave enough to get them into the tub or maybe even outside. But tomato juice is more of a kind of an urban legend. I don't think it really works that effectively. Some of the things that do help with deterring skunks, motion detectors. So if you have motion detectors in your backyard, most times if they trip that, then they won't necessarily go into the light, because they feel threatened by just that change in the lighting. Some people have good luck with sprinkler systems certain times of the night if they find skunks are meandering around. I think that's probably a little extreme, but just the best thing to do is to try to seal up any of those accessible areas, like under the sheds or in underneath different porches. I know we had lattice work around our farmer's porch, and part of it had collapsed over time. So we had to make sure that there was nothing under there and then resecure it. So that's another thing you want to do before you reattach something. Make sure that there is nothing that is in there, especially during the day, because then not only you trap the animal, but it will be quite an odor, as you can imagine, decomposition there. Okay, any questions about our skunks? Again, fastidiously clean animals.
Well, someone wants to know what you do use for skunk spray.
If you do get sprayed by a skunk?
Um, I'm thinking that is, yeah, what they're
Okay.
looking for.
Yeah, the veterinary community that I talked to about this, they recommend a mixture of baking soda, hydrogen peroxide, and dish detergent, because you basically want to try to neutralize that sulfur compound by kind of breaking it down. And that will help with a couple of washes really mitigate that smell. But it is quite potent. And of course, that warning coloration for skunks, as well as that really noxious irritant odor, that's an advertisement to any potential predator that stay away, it's not worth it. Of course, great horned owls have very, very poor sense of smell, so that's really not a consideration for owls being the prime predator of many of our skunks. But it's typically the backyard dogs that are going out for their last time at night that get into trouble with the skunks. So this time of year, you might just want to keep a little bit of an eye when you let your dog out, maybe have it on a leash so that it's not going to come in contact if you think that you have skunks around your yard.
And what would
Okay.
you do if perchance your dog or your pet does get sprayed in their eyes get sprayed with a skunk by a skunk?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think I would first to try to flush it, but I would definitely put a call into the emergency vet, especially if it was in the eyes, because again, that compound is pretty potent. You would just want to make sure that you have veterinary advice as to how to treat an eye spray. When in doubt, I always contact the vet. Um, Okay, so Virginia possums. This is another picture of my pal Hank here outside in a really snowy scene we had in early January here in New Hampshire. And he found a little piece of compost that he was kind of trying to move away to go up into a tree to eat it safely. So let's get into possums. I just think they're absolutely adorable. They're almost so odd looking that they're really cute. So they are our only marsupial in the North American continent. Much like a koala or a kangaroo that we have down under, they do have the pouches. The females are called gillies and the young are called joeys. And the female will have bee-sized babies that will move after about 2 weeks from her womb into her pouch, where they will stay for several more months until they're old enough, and then they will come out and they tend to ride on her back. I can only imagine trying to navigate around with 7 or 8 young clinging to your back. That's quite a feat. So I have a lot of admiration for her. And they'll stay close to her for another couple of months. They do have abundant teeth. Possums have over 50 teeth, the most of most mammals. So they are really an orthodontist stream. If you've ever seen a possum with its mouth gaping open, those teeth are just really quite sharp. Doesn't seem to be any real pattern to them. Some of them look like they hang down when the mouth closes. But they're quite a great defense feature for them, their teeth. And one thing that's kind of interesting with the possum, if you ever see possum prints in the snow, and I would recommend if you're in the northern part of the country and you're still maybe getting some light snowfalls, in the morning, go out and look to see what type of tracks and prints that you can find. That's a great way to identify too who you have, what animals are in your area, and the snow and even the mud tell a great story about what's been happening at night. So the opposable thumbs of the possum, they're quite adept. You can kind of see right here in this picture, it looks like there are 5 kind of fingers, fleshy looking fingers, and possums will be able to grasp a piece of food and kind of do this type of motion. So they have a lot of agility in those opposable thumbs. And that allows them to be quite adept climbers too. Possums do climb pretty readily. Hank, my pal Hank, I watched him a couple of weeks ago grab something from the compost pile. He waddled over we have a big stand of juniper trees outside that porch area where his picture was taken. And he climbed up the tree and he looked a little ungangly going up. The limb was not really supporting his weight. He kept kind of falling and sort of clinging on with his paws. It was kind of a funny moment. But that prehensile tail that they have is used for balance, and it's also used to help collect different materials as they're starting to create a denning site. They'll wrap leaves and maybe even some small twigs and plant fibers, kind of curl it up in that tail and waddle over to that den and drag that in. So they're not really able to hang by the tail. It looks like it could be used for that purpose, but it's not. In the Northeast, in our colder climates, the tail as well as those ears are very prone to frostbite. So many wildlife rehabilitators will be getting possums in with frostbitten tails and ears. They are definitely very much omnivorous. So they will eat, just like the raccoons and the skunk, opportunistically insects, small little mammals, amphibians, small reptiles, as well as some of the garden pests that I'm plagued with slugs and some other undesirable insects. So they are really what I consider a gardener's friend. They help keep our gardens sort of clean of some of the more infesting critters that can get and ruin our gardens. They're also an incredible consumer of ticks. So again, with our warming climate and sort of the changing weather, ticks have, at least here in the Northeast, and I believe throughout most of the northern part of our country, ticks are a huge problem, and they are, with the warmer, wetter climates, they are exploding. So having possums in your yard is a really excellent thing as far as tick control. The idea about playing possum, this is something that I find is a fascinating adaptation to sort of protect themselves. It tends to be more the young possums that do this particular behavior, but like the skunk spraying, it's a last resort because it is a high energy demand and it puts the animal into a little bit of a precarious position. So before they actually have this involuntary reflex of falling over, they will do some other type of warning behavior to a potential predator. They will belch, they'll hiss, they'll defecate, they'll urinate, all really attractive features. And then if that's not working, if still they feel threatened, they actually do have that involuntary reflex where they will just fall over and it look like they're dead or they have fainted. And they become very stiff. There's drool that will come from their mouth. They will bare their teeth. And there's a foul liquid that they can expel from their anal area. So, I mean, what predator really wants to go and take all that on when there may be something else a little bit tastier down the road? And this state can last up to 6 hours. So adult possums are more likely to try to run, to get away, going up a tree or some other structure. But playing possum, it's pretty serious business if it does happen. Possums are actually quite adept at swimming. I've never seen it. I would love to see that. And they're able to actually go underwater for brief periods of time. So an incredibly adapted animal when you think about all the fun characteristics they have. They tend to have more natural immunity to rabies because of their low body temperature. So hopefully now that you may have learned a few more little kind of fun things about possums, you'll see them as a welcome addition to your yard, if for nothing else than the tick control. All right, gray squirrels. This is one of my favorite animals, and this right here, this squirrel that we'll talk about, her name was Dot, and she was a 12-year-old squirrel that I had in my yard that is probably close to a record. Most squirrels in the wild only survive maybe 3, 4, 5 years, but Dot was here with us for quite a while. And squirrels, there's a picture. You can see on the top of her back, there's a white little patch of albino fur. So I wasn't very clever when I named her Dot, but the name stuck. And so let's kind of talk about squirrels. They are rodents. They're active year round. And their primary behavior in the fall, we see them running around with acorns. They're called scatter hoarders. They need to cache or store food to access for the winter time, because once we get into the winters here in the Northeast, there's really not a production of berries or nuts or the typical things that they eat throughout the rest of the year. So they have to store that food. So it's a very active time in fall. Squirrels are running around with burying different acorns. They do have an incredible sense of smell. They can retrieve those acorns buried about 10 inches to 12 inches of snow. Their sense of smell can detect where an acorn is buried. They're not buried very deeply. A squirrel will take an acorn, run over to an appropriate spot. You might watch them. They're kind of looking around as they're using their paws to dig a slight depression, maybe an inch or two under the leaf litter, put the acorn in it, and they cover it up, and off they go to get another one. There's opportunistic squirrels that may be sitting in a branch watching a squirrel that has done the work of finding that acorn and burying it. If that squirrel notices another squirrel watching them, they will sort of feign burying the acorn and then run off. The squirrel will come down, try to retrieve that acorn, think I've got a quick little meal here, and the squirrels have outwitted each other. So there's really no honor among thieves here.
So I have quite a few questions about squirrels now that you're in this section. There's a couple of them about because squirrels also like to go and eat from bird feeders, and they want people want to know if there's a natural way to keep squirrels away from the bird feeder. Some people have tried, cinnamon or cayenne, but they would like to know if there is a more natural way.
Sure. The only natural way is to not put out bird feeders, because I have found in my experience there is no such thing as a squirrel proof feeder. Just today I had a garden shepherd's hook outside. I had 2 suet cakes hanging from cages on it. I had several different things that I had put up to deter a squirrel. Finally, I had to get a baffle and secure it. So the only way to keep a squirrel from getting up onto your bird feeders is to position a pole in the ground with a baffle, which is sort of like a metal, almost like a pie plate, so they can't get up the pole, shimmy up the pole to your feeders, and at least have 6 to 7 feet circumference around your feeder where there's no launching point, or sort of launching even from above, like a low hanging branch or a deck rail. That is the best that you can do. I did recently order some of the cayenne seed, because I have a little window mounted feeder that I love to look when I'm washing dishes. So far that has worked, but inevitably there'll be one squirrel that won't be necessarily repelled by the taste of the cayenne and the chili. So I think someone will get a Nobel Prize if they can truly come up with something that is squirrel proof. So it's a matter of trying to limit their accessibility to your feeders by placement with baffle, and again, having no launching pad. I've actually had to cut down a couple of branches, and when there's that Olympic worthy squirrel that has outwitted me with running up the feeder or launching from quite a distance and landing right on something and bypassing the baffle. But they're quite clever, quite persistent. And one thing that's great about the squirrels, with all those acorns that they bury, they only retrieve about 80% as a group over the course of the winter. So the remaining 20%, of course, is a great way to have the oak trees and even the beech trees germinate. It's a great seed dispersal. So it's kind of designed that way that they don't retrieve all of them. But if you notice this time of year, for those of us in the Northeast that we don't have any leaves on our deciduous trees, take a look tomorrow when it's daylight and you're out, because the summer nests of squirrels, and they do typically have 2 litters per year, as long as the food supply will support that. Those big leafy balls that you see that are about a basketball size, maybe even a little bit bigger up in the deciduous trees, are what we call drays. These are the summer nests of squirrels that they construct in a really secure little crotch or V in the upper branches. They'll bite some of the branches and create this sort of stick-like structure, and then they'll line that with overlapping leaves that have the waxy coating on it. So it creates almost like a waterproofing, and it's a really secure nest to raise that second litter if there are no tree cavities available. So take a look tomorrow when you're out and about in the daylight and see if you can spot the drays up in the deciduous trees. Unfortunately, it does tend to attract ravens and crows and even hawks, because they know that that is a food source of young squirrels. So again, it's the food web. It's kind of horrifying to see that being raided in late summer when these drays are used as a nesting site. Yeah, squirrels can be quite entertaining, but they can also be quite maddening.
So,
Here's
and
just
one other question is,
sure.
what would you do if you do find an injured animal like a squirrel or any of the ones that you have talked about previously?
Yeah, because again, an injured animal is a scared animal, and it's really best to contact a wildlife rehabilitator or your local animal control. If you can, I wouldn't even suggest trying to, gently corral the animal into a box with anything like that. I would absolutely just try to keep pets away, keep children away so that they're not agitating that animal further. If you notice if you're driving and there's an injured animal on the side of the road, same thing. Try to get in touch with a licensed wildlife rehabilitator or animal control. Please don't try to intervene because we don't have the correct training, nor do we have the correct tools to keep ourselves safe as well as that animal. Again, I can't emphasize enough, an injured animal is a scared, trapped animal, so it requires special training to deal with that situation. That's an excellent question, because I think many of us feel so compelled to try to help. But the best thing that we can do, the best way to help is to get in touch with the people that have the correct training. Um, so here's just a few more little shots of my pal Dot. She was quite a character watching her for 12 years here in my yard. We had many family and friends that have followed the legacy of Dot over the years. All right, Eastern chipmunks. These are little garden hooligans, I call them, because they are absolutely adorable, but boy, they can wreak quite a bit of havoc. So let's kind of talk quickly about some of their characteristics. Again, like many of these animals that we've just discussed, they are omnivores, so very opportunistic. They'll eat whatever they can find. Chipmunks are very filled with energy. They're eating a lot. They have a high metabolic rate. They need to spend a lot of time eating. One of their hallmark characteristics is that giant cheek pouch. They can expand their facial area 3 times the size with those huge cheek pouches that are used to cache or store food to go into those underground burrow systems. Now, the chipmunks here in the northern part of the country will go into a deeper sleep, like a sense of torpor in the wintertime. And they have to cache or store enough food in their underground burrow systems where they have several little food larder carve outs where they store all of these acorns and seeds and other things they're hauling in the early fall into the mid fall. I saw my first chipmunk today, and for southern New Hampshire, that's about on average to see the first chipmunk. He came out, he looked pretty good. Sometimes they do wake up this time of year to stretch, or if they don't have enough food secured for themselves, they may have to try to get some more to get their selves through the rest of the winter. But typically they're coming out in within the next month into March and April. Males come out first, search out females. The winter survival is really dependent on having those abundant stores set aside. 2 litters per year. Again, like most rodents, they're quite the breeders and quite successful at large litters. The males are the ones that you'll see first, kind of running around with their tails up, and they're again seeking out females. Their alarm calls are that classic knocking. They get up on a higher elevation and they can knock and do that alarm call. It can be quite insistent and annoying. But for the most part, they're solitary and extremely territorial little characters. I think they're just beautifully marked and colored, but they can be quite destructive within our gardens. So those burrow systems typically have a very camouflaged opening. So you can have a chipmunk sort of disappear underground and not even see where it goes. Okay, the eastern coyote. I'm going to talk briefly about the coyote because this is an animal that unfortunately is getting a lot of bad press and a lot of concern. And I would like to, just in the next couple of minutes, try to dispel as many myths as I can about the coyote. I know here in the New England area, the coyotes, particularly Massachusetts, the populations are exploding and it's becoming a real concern. There's an excellent publication, Massachusetts Wildlife. They come out with their wildlife journals. I think it's monthly. There's great information and articles here on the eastern coyote. But this is not an animal that is indigenous to this part of the country. It was not until about 100 years ago, or actually less than that, that the western coyote started to move eastward, and the ones that are here in the Northeast had been breeding with the gray wolf, the Canadian gray wolf. So it's a little bit of a hybrid animal, and there are some that have been breeding with domestic dogs. That's definitely much more rare, but this is an animal, an eastern coyote, that is a different species than the western coyote. The characteristics of it are that it tends to be a little bit bigger than its western counterpart. You can see that it looks a little bit like a German Shepherd, but it's much lighter. It's only 30 to 50 pounds, and most of that looks like that beautiful fluffy coat and that long tail, slender legs, the wide pointy ears, long tapered muzzle, and like I said, the very thick coat. The coat coloration can vary within the eastern coyotes. It has nothing to do with the sexes. It's just like how many of us have different hair color. It's just the way it's an expression of a particular gene. So let's kind of talk a little bit about some of the other characteristics. Like I said, they're extremely opportunistic, very adaptable. They're one of the species that we've chatted tonight that have really adapted quite well to living in urban as well as suburban environments. And being a pack animal, there's an alpha male and female, and they're a monogamous pair, and they have the young of the previous year that may stay with them and form that pack. And the females are an estrus, and they'll be mating and they'll be giving birth within within May. So right now is a time of year where coyotes are sort of solidifying that bond, the pair bond, by scent marking, making sure their territories are established and well advertised. So there's a lot of activity going on right now. Once those pups are born in May, and on average the litter is 7, if they are disturbed in the den site that they've chosen, which is often an old or an abandoned fox den, then the parents will move them, and both parents are involved in the care and the raising of the young. And it's difficult because come late fall, the young from the spring are sort of kicked out, and they have to disperse for the most part and find their own territories. And coyotes are famous for their vocalizations. They have a lot of different howls and yelps and high-pitched cries, which when the pack does this for pack contact, it's ways of keeping in touch with each other. It can sound like there's a lot more coyotes than there really are. And one of the challenges that many municipalities are running into is coyotes, of course, they're opportunistic. They're like any living thing, just looking to survive, to feed their young. That they're running into situations with small outdoor pets, dogs and cats. They see them as either a potential food source or a potential threat. A small dog still could be a threat to, it's a canine, so it could perceive it as another type of threat to its territory or its family. So what will happen if one of the pair of the alpha male or female is either captured or killed, there's going to be a little bit of a population explosion as other members try to breed to then try to take over that sort of dominant role. So it's kind of, it's opposite of what we would expect. If one is trapped or removed, it actually will increase the population. So that's something that a lot of, again, towns are looking at. How do we manage this? And the best way to do it, and again, I suggest if you can get online and get this Massachusetts Wildlife, it's their latest issue. It has some excellent suggestions. And the number one thing they talk about is to secure all food, especially pet food or human related food that will draw these animals closer to us, because they are becoming habituated to being fed by people, which again, people just want to watch them. They're not really thinking through, it happens with bears as well, that it isn't necessarily in the best interest of the animal. It will most likely put them at risk of being euthanized or removed from the area. So to try, especially this time of year where they're out and about and they're breeding, and in the next couple of months when the young are born, if you do have small dogs and you have the dogs outside, it's advised to have them on a leash to just supervise. There's never been a coyote attack of a small pet if it's with its owner on a leash. So just to kind of keep in mind what's going on in your yard or your area, and just to be prudent for your pets as well as the coyote. Experts also recommend to what they call haze an animal. So if you do see a coyote, just to try to make noise, even, an air gun or something to sort of scare it away, so that it does recognize that that's not a safe place to be, which is in its best interest. Okay, just quickly, the white-tailed deer. There's a picture of a deer in my backyard that was eating some final vegetation available. And this is that same deer that was really close to my house. They'd be very opportunistic, true herbivores. There's no consumption of meat for these animals here, but they do actually change their diet seasonally. So deer in the spring, the summer, and early fall are adapted microbiome in their gut to digest the deciduous leaves, herbaceous plants. Come fall, they have a microbiome change in their gut, and they're more adapted to only eat what we call browse, which is sort of the woody twigs. So if a deer came upon a whole load of apples, it may eat that, but it wouldn't necessarily be able to digest it. So they're often found what they call starving full, because they're not able to digest. It takes about 2 weeks for that microbiome to make the switch back come spring or going into winter. So just to kind of, I suggest never feeding any animals, but particularly deer. They're very susceptible to problems because they can't digest. They're a huge tick vector. They carry and transport ticks. So think about ticks on them will move quite a distance and then drop to the ground and be picked up by chipmunks and some of our smaller mammals that we've talked about tonight. So hence the word deer tick, that term. The winter protection that they do is they kind of yard up with each other. They develop a beautiful coat in the fall that's hollow hair. So it's like a very insulating type of coat for them, and it blends in. Oftentimes deer are out in my yard with patchy snow now, and I don't even see them until they start to move and you see the white tail. So just a beautiful animal, but they can do a lot of damage to your gardens. I've had good luck with the deer repellent sprays, which is like a putrefied egg mixture. It's horrific to put down, but it dries and you don't smell it, and it will deter deer, or try to garden with deer resistant type of plants. There's a quick shout out to the black bear. As I mentioned earlier, they'll be coming out of hibernation shortly here in the Northeast. So it's a good idea, again, with their incredible sense of smell and their memory and their now hunger coming out, to take your bird feeders in, so that you're not having a habituated bear. It won't end well for that bear, because many bear have to be tranquilized or even euthanized to if they get into conflicts with in our local backyards. Okay, so Dot's going to just bring us quickly through some of the, just to recap some of the strategies so that we can safely coexist with these animals, keeping them safe, us safe, and our pets safe. The number one thing I would really point out is to make sure that we're securing all of the potential food sources, particularly pet food outside. That's the biggest attractor for a lot of these animals, especially coyotes, like I mentioned earlier. So you want to make sure that anything that will attract them for their acute sense of smell is secured in a garage or in a home or a shed. Bird feeder placement, we've talked a little bit about that. So to kind of think about squirrels, if you want to feed, kind of think about from a squirrel's perspective, where can't I get? And that's where you want to place your bird feeder. And also to be aware of taking bird feeders in probably within the next couple of weeks if you are in an area that is prone to bear, which again, given the encroachment of where we are going with a lot of our local habitats for these animals. Most likely, many of us are now within bear territory. Gardening choices, it also talks, I want to talk about pesticides. It's important that for the safety of these animals, as well as our overall health, that we are not using pesticides in our gardens. It does disrupt the food chain on so many levels. The other thing I want to just quickly mention is rodenticide, putting out products that will kill mice and other types of rodents. Unfortunately, who becomes the victim of that are the more apex predators like our hawks and our owls that consume those animals that have that pesticide or that rodenticide in them. It moves up the food chain to those top predators, and there's been lots of problems with our hawks and owls and even some of our larger mammals. So just to kind of think through your choices and the impact it will have, inspect those sheds, those porches, chimneys for any access points, particularly for raccoons that tend to be drawn to that. If you do have chickens or poultry, make sure that your chickens have a secure nighttime pen. So for their sake, as well as they're not going to be coming into conflict with an opportunistic fox or a coyote, or again, some other animal that's simply looking for a meal. Do those tick checks daily. Ticks are, again, responding very favorably to our changing climate. So make sure that you're keeping yourself, your pets, and your children safe by doing those tick checks. One thing I would suggest too, that I have had a lot of fun with this, is putting out a wildlife camera. I have a couple in my yard, of key spots that I know wildlife travel. And like I have a low area that collects water. It's part of our perimeter system to take water from the foundation. It's almost like a hot spring in a way, because it's warm water coming from around the lower part of the foundation. It is an absolute mecca for wildlife to come get a drink, especially in the deep winter when most other water sources are frozen. So we have a camera on that. That's oftentimes where I'll see Hank and some of the other characters that you've met tonight. So the best thing to do, in my advice, is to really learn about the animals that share your particular communities, your spaces, your habitats. Come to understand them so that you can appreciate them. And the more we know about them, the more likely we are to make good choices for them and for ourselves, so that we can live in a peaceful coexistence, so that they can thrive and we can thrive as well. So that's what I have tonight. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I know Ashley or Mary have a few parting comments.
Thank you, Kelly. We still have a couple of questions, if I may. There is one question about what foods can and should not be shared with wildlife. For example, her husband throws out cupcakes that have been left over from a party, and the next day they're all gone. So she's kind of concerned because, the cake is sugary and there was frosting. And so just concerned about things like popcorn and that type of thing.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. It's tempting to put things out so we're not throwing it out. We think, some other character or critter could use that, but you're absolutely spot on as far as, like, it's best to let animals find what they naturally would find. So I don't put anything out other than what goes in my compost pile, and the deer will eat that, but it's usually, lettuce leaves and things that in the summertime they'd be eating anyway. But any type of human food, I would strongly suggest not putting out. It's just better to throw it out.
Okay, great. And just checking, somebody wanted to know if you had any recommendations for a wildlife camera.
Oh yeah, I have ours is, I believe it's a Bicknell. So one thing you could do is go to like Cabela's or some of the sporting goods stores, or even go on Amazon, and you want something that has really good battery life. Ours uses lithium batteries. I've been in the market to find one that would have a solar panel, because then I won't have to change the batteries. But the lithium batteries last quite a bit, and I just take the little SD card or the chip out. It's very simple, nothing complicated there. So I think I spent a little over $100 for it, and it's been well worth it. It's a lot of fun, but around that range, you can get a really good one.
Okay, and my goodness, the squirrels are definitely getting a lot of attention tonight. So someone leaves out oranges for the squirrels, and that they leave the peels on the ground, and they do try to pick up the peels, but sometimes they wonder if the peels can be hazardous to their pet dog.
Interesting. That would be a great question for the veterinarian, their vet to ask that. I'm not aware of that. I don't personally have a dog, so I wouldn't have had that concern, but that's an excellent question. It's a good call to the vet just to verify.
Okay, and let's see. Also, in the Northeast time frame from birth to weaning, they just want to know. They said they have a real squirrel problem, and they want to rehome some of the squirrels, but they don't want to do it if there's a litter somewhere. I guess they want to know
Yes.
how long between when the squirrel is born to when they are have been weaned.
Yeah, that's one of those kind of ethical dilemmas that I've faced myself because again, squirrels population fluctuates with the mass crop. So here in the Northeast, we had squirrel again a couple, well, maybe 5 years ago, where it was a horror show of squirrel mortality rather on the roads. But the litter that's being kind of almost born now in late February, March, the winter litter, they usually are weaned within, I would say, 6 to 8 weeks. You'll see those little young, kind of fuzzy looking squirrels out and about. And then if there's enough food, there'd be another litter in late summer. So there's an opportunity. The only challenge is if you trap a squirrel and you relocate it somewhere else, it's probably not going to make it because introducing it to another habitat that probably has a good balance of squirrels, and now you have that carrying capacity issue. So I think it's probably best to just sort of let nature take its course. If there are too many squirrels, not enough food, there's a lot of food for predators. They are a prey animal, so it will be great for the hawks, the owls, the coyotes, the fox. But again, that's a personal decision, but the best time probably would be over the summer.
Okay, and one last question, Kelly. Someone wants to know, I've had a couple of questions about how do you keep chipmunks out of a garden?
Boy, again, if someone figures that out, please get in touch with me. I don't know of any way to deter them other than try to minimize available food sources. The bird feeders, they love to collect seed from the ground. That's the best way. If you have a vegetable garden, I know my brother-in-law's had great luck with digging down with some of the fencing so that it's probably at least 10 inches under the ground, because then you don't have the woodchuck issue. But chipmunks, they can burrow. Their burrows are about 2 to 3 feet deep. So that's another one of those things where I've been absolutely vexed by beautiful tomato I'm ready to pick. The chipmunk has eaten it. So I think just putting some type of fencing the best that you can around your gardens to deter them, but they can climb. So they are probably the biggest bane of a gardener's existence. Oh, I love that. We buried okay, yeah. I saw the fortress, yes.
I know many different ways of trying to take care of those garden critters. So thank you, Kelly, so much for sharing all of your expertise tonight. I mean, this was a really great program, and lots of questions and lots of comments in the chat and also in the Q&A. I want to thank our audience for joining us tonight, and I hope that you did enjoy learning about your backyard neighbors. I see a lot of wonderful comments in the chat saying thank you for such a great presentation. And be sure to check our AARP New Hampshire website often, which is aarp.org/nh, for more virtual and in-person programs. So thank you everybody for joining us tonight, and thank you, Kelly, for such a great presentation.
Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being patient with the little tech glitch. And please keep being curious and keep learning and just finding out what's going on around your community with your wildlife.
Right. And if you do, this program has been recorded and it will be on the AARP New Hampshire YouTube channel in a few days. If you want to revisit this presentation and learn more about Kelly's tips and about backyard neighbors. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye, Kelly.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye.